In the name of God, the gracious, the merciful. That was it, just that, and all the anger I carried against Islam, against a people I didn't even know, against a faith I had never read, against a God I never understood, simply dissolved like smoke. It wasn't an argument, it wasn't a debate. It was a truth that entered directly, as if it pierced through my chest and said, "You already knew, you just forgot." I had built my identity on top of contempt. I grew up mocking Muslims without ever having looked one in the eyes. I repeated phrases, jokes, and accusations as if they were mine, but they were just echoes of a broken world. And it took just a single verse, the first of the Quran, for that world to crumble, not with screams nor fury, but with silence and tears. My name is Luis Pereira, I'm 21 years old, and I was born in Brazil in the Goiás region, but I grew up in the United Kingdom since I was 5 years old. On my birth certificate it said Christian, but the truth is I never was. I was just another young man who said he believed in God, but lived as if he were just a cultural detail, an inherited label, an empty decoration. I studied at Catholic school, prayed out of obligation, was baptized without understanding, and like many only noticed the emptiness when I was already drowning in it. And meanwhile, my heart filled with fear and prejudice. Yes, I was Islamophobic. I hated what I didn't know. But this video isn't about hatred. It's about what happens when truth finds the soul at the exact moment it's about to give up. Before continuing, tell me in the comments, what country are you watching this video from? Your presence here is no accident, and if this story has already touched something inside you, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what comes next. I never met a real Muslim, never sat with one, never listened attentively. Even so, I hated. I hated by osmosis. From what I saw on the news, from what my colleagues said, from the racist jokes at school. I grew up hearing that Muslim is terrorist, like someone learning multiplication tables. It was repetition. It was social poison disguised as culture. The most ironic part? I was also a victim, a foreigner, son of separated parents, living in a neighborhood where the color of your skin was enough to become a joke. But instead of questioning this sick system, I absorbed everything. I became the type of person who mocked other immigrants so as not to be the next target, a shield made of hypocrisy. But Islam was still there, invisible but present. Like a mirror I avoided looking at. And it only reached me on the day I stopped running from pain. It all started on a grey October morning. I had worked 12 hours straight. I was exhausted, alone, frustrated with life, and with an invisible weight that wouldn't leave my chest. That day, I sat on the edge of the bed and cried like a child, not knowing what to do, not knowing what to believe in, and it was in this heavy silence that a phrase appeared inside me. Buy the book. No explanation, no name, just that. Buy the book. I knew which one it was. I didn't need to ask anyone. I opened the browser, went to a sales website and bought the Quran, without even understanding why. When it arrived, I left it on the shelf, without touching, without opening, as if it were a silent reminder of something I wasn't ready to face yet. Months later, something strange happened. The war in Ukraine broke out, and in a surge of purpose and desperation, I decided I would go there, be a volunteer, defend a cause that wasn't even mine. I created WhatsApp groups with other volunteers. I prepared to cross the border through Poland, and on the day I would have crossed, the base where I would stay was bombed by Russian missiles. 64 people died. Hundreds were injured, and I stayed alive. There, without understanding, without deserving, without having said any prayer, I was saved. It was as if heaven had placed an invisible wall between me and death. For the first time in years I cried again, but this time out of gratitude, out of shame, and because of a question that burned. If God saved me, why? It was at that moment that I turned my gaze back to that shelf. The book was still there, intact, waiting, and this time I opened it, and nothing was ever the same. When I opened the Quran, I wasn't met with judgments or threats, no imposition, no shouting. The first sentence I read was short, gentle, direct, and yet overwhelming. In the name of Allah, the merciful, the compassionate. It was as if something that was covered inside me had been pulled back to the light. I can't explain it rationally, but in that instant, something that was burning inside me stopped. And the hatred I had carried for years, that prejudice that wasn't even mine, but that I had adopted to protect myself, simply evaporated. There was no visible miracle. I didn't break down in tears nor have visions, but there was a peace I had never felt before. It was as if that phrase had found a place that had always been its own, but was hidden underneath everything, the anger, the trauma, the forced identity, the inherited culture. It was familiar, but new, simple, but deep. Almost like remembering something I already knew but had forgotten. I began to read each page, not as someone discovering something unprecedented, but as someone finding what they were looking for and didn't even know it. The verses didn't shout at me. They conversed. Each line seemed to dismantle a doubt, dissolve a lie, and offer an alternative way of existence where God was not a confusing mystery, but a creator who presents himself as mercy even before presenting himself as judge. There I realized Islam wasn't trying to convert me, it was just reminding me. And that's what scared me most, and at the same time freed me, because maybe truth isn't something we acquire. Maybe it's already in us, just waiting to be reactivated. And with me, it all started with a single phrase. A few months before all this, still in 2021, I was having one of my heaviest days. I worked exhausting 12-hour shifts, suffered silently with anxiety attacks, and felt trapped in a meaningless existence. That night, sitting on the edge of the bed, without strength to say a prayer, I heard a phrase inside my mind. It wasn't a common thought. It was a direct command. Buy the book. No title, no explanation, just that. I don't know why, but I knew exactly which book it was about. I opened the shopping app on my phone and typed Quran. In less than 3 minutes, I placed the order, without knowing why, without understanding the reason. When it arrived, I left it there on the shelf, closed, for months. It was as if my subconscious had taken a step ahead of my heart. The strangest thing is that during this time, my aversion to Islam was still strong. I mocked, avoided videos on the subject, refused any argument. And even so, that book was there, like a silent seed in the corner of my room. Maybe my body and my mouth were still trapped in the beliefs I inherited, but my spirit already knew that something different was coming. And it was only after escaping from an announced tragedy, a bombing at a military base in Ukraine, which almost took my life before I even reached the destination, that I finally looked at that book with different eyes, not as a strange object, but as a forgotten invitation, a reminder that God had already called me, and I was just postponing the meeting. I was supposed to have died on March 13th, 2022. The plan was simple: cross Poland and reach the Revert military base in Ukraine as a volunteer. I didn't speak the language, didn't know anyone there, had never set foot in that country. But even so, motivated by an emotional revolt that I didn't quite understand, I wanted to fight. 2 days before the trip, a deep uneasiness paralyzed me. Something inside me said, "Don't go." I obeyed the intuition, not knowing I was escaping death. On the exact date I would have landed, the base was hit by 30 Russian missiles, 64 dead, 160 wounded, 10 missing. The images of the attack circulated in the news. I saw the rubble, the blood, the volunteers in panic. Among them could have been the faces I met days before, with whom I exchanged messages, laughter, and plans to cross the border. And I would have been just another name on the list of the dead. It was impossible not to recognize. someone spared me. Someone pulled me from that plane. And in that moment, for the first time in my life, I cried before God, a God I still didn't know how to name, but who clearly knew me. The question that pierced me like a blade was, why was I saved? What was there in me, so lost, so confused, that still deserved a second chance? It was the first time in years that atheism and skepticism lost their grip, not because of logic, but because of survival. The spiritual world I used to mock reached me with mercy. And there, in that heavy silence between a death avoided and a life reclaimed, I found myself looking again at that forgotten book on the shelf, the Quran, and somehow everything started to make sense. I opened the Quran with no plans, no ritual, no expectations. I just sat down, took a deep breath, and let the pages take me somewhere. And right there in the first line I read, "In the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful." It was as if time had stopped, as if that sentence had been written just for me, for the boy who learned to hate Islam without ever knowing it, for the teenager who mocked Muslims without ever speaking to one, for the young adult who carried wounds disguised as superiority. That sentence didn't accuse me. It didn't shame me. It welcomed me. And in that moment, an uncomfortable truth was revealed. My problem was never with Islam. It was with myself, with my arrogance, with the questions I never had the courage to ask, with the shame of seeming weak in front of others. I didn't hate Muslims. I feared what they represented. Faith with purpose, solid identity, conscious submission. Things I never had. Things I secretly envied. As I read, I felt something melt inside me. It wasn't guilt. It was liberation. What used to be hate became confession. What was once resistance became thirst. Page after page, verse after verse, the feeling was one of reunion, not with a religion but with a dormant memory. As if I had forgotten who I was, and Islam was simply reminding me. In those days, I didn't need anyone to convince me. The Quran doesn't shout. It speaks. It reveals. It heals. And above all, it showed me that God was never absent. I was the one with closed ears. And now, finally, I could hear. I went from the first chapter to the second, then the third. And before I knew it, I was reading non-stop, not like someone studying a new doctrine, but like someone rediscovering pieces of themselves. With each verse, I felt as though I was cleaning a dusty mirror, and behind that dust, there I was, the me who had always believed that God is one, that prayer should be direct, that faith should come from understanding, not fear or blind tradition. And the more I read, the more I realized, Islam wasn't trying to win me over. It was just reminding me of something that had always lived inside me. It wasn't the logic of the arguments that held me, though they were strong. It was the sense of coherence. One God, with no intermediaries. A practical faith that didn't demand irrational sacrifices or empty promises. A spirituality expressed in everyday life, in how you treat others, in the care for your parents, in the sincerity of your intentions. For the first time, I saw religion as a path back to the essence, not as a burden imposed by past generations. At the same time, everything that once seemed strange to me about Muslims, the way they dressed, the daily prayers, the recitation of the Quran, started to make sense. It wasn't rigidity, it was structure, it wasn't oppression, it was inner freedom, it was discipline with purpose, something my life had always lacked. That was when I realized the greatest miracle of all. Islam didn't erase who I was. It revealed who I had always been. And in the silence of those early morning readings, with no audience, no debates, no outside pressure, I knew there was no going back. Because what had been illuminated inside me could no longer be dimmed. For years, I ignored the existence of God or referred to him with a certain sarcasm disguised as skepticism. But that day, when I realized the military base I would have arrived at the exact time, in the exact place, had been hit by dozens of missiles, Something collapsed inside me. It wasn't just relief at having escaped death. It was shame. Shame for having spent my life mocking a force that, without me deserving it, had just saved me. I remember crying alone in the dark of my room for the first time in years, but it wasn't despair. It was gratitude. It was the kind of crying that doesn't come from a rational place, but from the depths of the soul, as if the soul itself recognized a truth that my mind was still trying to resist. For the first time, I spoke sincerely to the sky. I didn't say Lord of Hosts or Heavenly Father. I just said, if you saved me, show me the way. Show me who you are. It was that night, without knowing why, that I went back to the bookshelf and picked up the Quran I had bought months earlier. No ritual, no preparation, no fear. I opened it at random and read, "In the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful," just that. One sentence, but it was like water on burning embers. I felt my heart relax. There was no threat, no fury. There was welcome. For the first time, I read something about God that didn't feel like it was yelling at me. That didn't make me feel dirty, unworthy, or lost, just human. That was the first night I slept in peace after many years. And I knew that peace didn't come because I was physically safe. It came because, for the first time, I was where I had always meant to be, on a path of return. Not to someone else's religion, but to the essence that had always been mine, and that until then I had ignored. In the days that followed, I kept opening the Quran whenever I had time. No rush, no system, but with hunger. Not for intellectual answers, but for spiritual coherence. And the more I read, the more I realized that Islam wasn't trying to convince me of something new. It was just reminding me of what I had always known deep down. It was as if each verse was a key unlocking doors that life, the system, and my pride had locked inside me. But nothing compared to the impact of reading that same phrase a second time. Now not just with my eyes, but with my soul. In the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful. There was no call to war, to intolerance, to fear. On the contrary, it was as if God himself was saying, before anything else, know me through mercy. And that shattered me, because I had spent years calling Muslims radicals, crazy, oppressors, without ever having spoken to a single one of them. My hatred was inherited from ignorance, from the media, from malicious conversations with peers who had also never read a single line of the Quran. And now, all of that was crumbling in front of an opening phrase. I realized that prejudice is not the opposite of faith, it's the opposite of knowledge, and I knew absolutely nothing about Islam until that moment. That was when I understood. There is no greater miracle than an awakened conscience. Islam didn't capture me. It found me. It didn't impose rules. It offered meaning, and it all started with a sentence the whole world reads without understanding its weight. But I understood, and that's how the ice I had inside my chest started to melt, verse by verse. The next day, I woke up different. No longer as someone searching, but as someone ready to commit. There was no point in delaying the inevitable. It was no longer a matter of being convinced. It was a matter of courage, of admitting that something inside me had already surrendered. So that Friday, August 12th, with no cameras, no audience, no ceremony, I stood up, washed myself, knelt in my room, and declared, Ashhadu an la ilaha illa Allah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadur Rasulullah. It was like learning how to breathe again. For the first time, my name felt complete. For the first time, my story felt like it had direction. In that moment, I didn't gain a new label. I gained a new beginning. And even though I made the Shahada alone, I had never felt so accompanied. It was as if an invisible crowd welcomed me in silence. Peace. A peace that didn't come from an argument, but from surrender. A peace that wasn't the result of external persuasion, but of internal agreement. If you've made it this far, It's not by accident. I didn't choose this faith to stand out. I chose it because it explained what no one else could explain to me. And if it healed my hatred, maybe it can heal your doubt too. May Allah bless your journey, and may you have the courage to look within before you look outward.